What if I told you a routine flight turned into a $5 billion mistake in less than 10 minutes? No shouting, no scandal, no drama, just one decision that would cost an airline more than most companies make in a year. When airport security pulled Denzel Washington off a plane in front of stunned passengers, they thought they were following procedure. What they didn't realize was that the man quietly walking down that aisle wasn't just a Hollywood legend. He was connected to billions of dollars in funding. And within 48 hours, everything changed. This isn't just a story about a celebrity. It's a story about power, respect, and how one small moment can shake an entire corporation. Stay with me, because what happened next shocked corporate America. What happened next didn't just shock the passengers on that flight. It sparked a national conversation across America. The cabin doors were seconds from closing. Overhead bins clicked shut one after another. Seatbelt signs glowed softly above the aisle. Flight attendants moved with routine efficiency, offering polite smiles as they performed final checks. Business travelers typed last-minute emails. A mother leaned over to calm her restless toddler. A college student adjusted his headphones. It was a completely ordinary departure from a major U.S. airport. Nothing felt unusual. And seated quietly in first class, wearing a simple dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, was Denzel Washington. No bodyguards, no special announcement, no red carpet treatment, no attempt to draw attention. Just a man flying like millions of Americans do every day, waiting for takeoff, minding his own business. For decades, Denzel has been one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. An Academy Award-winning actor, director, and producer, he built his legacy through unforgettable performances in films like Training Day, Remember the Titans, and Malcolm X. On screen, he has portrayed leaders, fighters, mentors, and men of conviction. Off-screen, he has earned a reputation for discipline, humility, faith, and quiet strength. That's exactly why what happened next felt so surreal. Just before the aircraft doors sealed shut, two uniformed security officers stepped onto the plane. Their presence alone shifted the energy in the cabin. They spoke briefly with a flight attendant near the entrance. No one could hear the conversation, but passengers began exchanging curious glances. Security rarely boards a plane moments before departure unless something is wrong. The officers then began scanning the cabin slowly, row by row. Heads turned. Whispers started. A businessman paused mid-email. A teenager removed one earbud. The tension was subtle, but rising. Then one officer stopped. He looked directly toward first class. He pointed. "Sir, we need you to come with us." The words weren't loud, but they cut through the cabin like a blade. Silence fell almost instantly. Denzel looked up calmly, removing his cap slightly as he met the officer's eyes. "Is there a problem?" he asked evenly, his tone controlled and respectful. "There's been a report," the officer replied. "We need to verify something." No accusation, no explanation, just ambiguity. But ambiguity in a situation like that feels heavy. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The atmosphere changed from curiosity to concern. Someone quietly lifted their phone and started recording. Another passenger leaned toward their neighbor and whispered, "Is that Denzel Washington?" A few heads turned more sharply now. Recognition spread through the first few rows like electricity. There was no argument, no visible resistance, no scene. Denzel stood up slowly, buttoned his jacket, and stepped into the aisle. And just like that, one of America's most admired public figures was being escorted off a commercial flight in front of hundreds of passengers. No explanation was given to the cabin, no announcement from the crew, no visible reason offered to anyone watching. Just quiet confusion hanging in the recycled cabin air. A flight attendant avoided eye contact. Another stared straight ahead, maintaining composure. The officers guided him toward the exit calmly, but the image was powerful, unexpected, and deeply uncomfortable. For many watching, something didn't sit right. There had been no disturbance, no raised voices, no visible issue. Yet here was a respected public figure being removed under unclear circumstances. As he disappeared through the aircraft door and onto the jet bridge, murmurs filled the silence he left behind. Why him? What happened? This doesn't make sense. Phones were already buzzing. Videos were already uploading. Within minutes, what started as a routine departure delay was transforming into something much bigger. Because in today's America, moments like this don't stay inside airplanes. They travel fast. And this ordinary flight was about to become a viral national headline in the United States. Some of the most powerful business decisions don't happen under bright lights or in front of cameras. They happen quietly, inside boardrooms, on private conference calls, over carefully negotiated agreements that never make front-page news. While the public sees red carpets and film premieres, another world operates behind the scenes, one built on capital, strategy, and long-term partnerships. Today's celebrities are not just entertainers. Many are sophisticated investors with diversified portfolios spanning industries far beyond Hollywood. They invest in production companies, technology startups, real estate developments, infrastructure projects, and private equity groups that shape entire sectors of the economy. Denzel Washington has long been known as more than just an actor. While audiences recognize him for his powerful performances and commanding on-screen presence, those in executive circles understand that he moves carefully and strategically off-screen as well. Over the years, he has reportedly aligned himself with business leaders involved in media expansion, infrastructure development, and high-level aviation partnerships. According to sources familiar with the situation, he was connected to an investment group preparing to commit nearly $5 billion toward airline industry initiatives. That number isn't symbolic. It represents the kind of capital capable of reshaping operational capacity, expanding routes, and influencing long-term competitiveness in one of America's most demanding industries. This funding was reportedly tied to several transformative initiatives. First, expanding domestic routes across underserved U.S. cities. Many mid-sized markets struggle with limited direct flight options, forcing travelers to rely on connecting hubs. Additional capital would allow airlines to explore new regional connections, strengthen domestic mobility, and tap into markets with untapped demand. Second, fleet modernization. Commercial aircraft orders cost billions of dollars. Upgrading fleets improves fuel efficiency, lowers maintenance costs, enhances passenger comfort, and strengthens environmental compliance. Modern planes reduce emissions and align with growing sustainability expectations from regulators and consumers alike. Third, sustainability upgrades. Aviation faces increasing pressure to reduce its carbon footprint. Investment in sustainable aviation fuel research, carbon offset programs, and next-generation aircraft technology requires significant long-term funding commitments. Fourth, strategic international partnerships. In a globalized economy, airlines rely on code-share agreements, alliance memberships, and international route expansion to remain competitive. Strengthening these partnerships can redefine an airline's global reach. In short, this wasn't a celebrity endorsement deal. This was transformational capital. In aviation, expansion is capital-intensive and unforgiving. Margins are thin. Fuel prices fluctuate. Operational disruptions carry enormous cost implications. That's why investor confidence becomes the backbone of growth. And confidence is fragile. When investors believe in leadership, strategy, and operational stability, funding flows steadily. But when uncertainty enters the picture, even briefly, momentum can stall. After the airport incident, Denzel reportedly described the experience as deeply disappointing. Not explosive, not humiliating, not dramatic, just disappointing. But at that level of influence, disappointment carries measurable consequences. Within 48 hours, the investment group connected to him paused the funding agreement. That decision alone was enough to trigger internal alarms. A funding pause doesn't always mean permanent withdrawal, but in high-level finance, even a pause introduces instability. It signals hesitation, and hesitation affects valuation models, long-term planning, and competitive positioning. Emergency board meetings were called. Executives reviewed internal reports to determine exactly how the situation escalated. Legal teams assessed contractual obligations and potential liability exposure. Investor relations departments prepared to answer questions from analysts and shareholders. Financial commentators quickly began projecting ripple effects. Would the funding resume once the controversy cooled? Would other investors reassess risk exposure? Would competing airlines leverage the situation to attract capital instead? Airline stocks showed signs of volatility as uncertainty grew. Business reporters questioned whether the incident suggested deeper systemic issues within frontline operations or customer handling protocols. The airline issued a public statement describing the situation as an unfortunate misunderstanding. But in corporate America, misunderstandings can be extraordinarily expensive. Because the core issue wasn't simply a technical system flag. Software glitches happen. Verification systems occasionally misfire. Human error is inevitable. The deeper concern was execution. Could the issue have been resolved discreetly at the gate before boarding? Was removal from the aircraft proportionate to the concern? Were de-escalation procedures followed correctly? Was communication respectful and transparent? When dealing with customers, especially in high-stress travel environments, tone and method matter as much as policy. In today's digital landscape, every incident carries amplified risk. Passengers record events instantly. Videos circulate globally within minutes. Public opinion forms long before official investigations conclude. Customer experience now directly intersects with investor confidence. That intersection is where the stakes multiply. Investors don't just evaluate financial spreadsheets. They assess leadership judgment, operational discipline, and crisis management capability. They look for organizations capable of handling unexpected situations with precision and professionalism. A single viral incident can raise questions about culture, about training, about decision-making hierarchies. For corporate leaders across the country, this situation became a real-time case study. It demonstrated how frontline employees represent the entire brand in critical moments. Small operational missteps can escalate into large-scale financial consequences. Public perception can influence capital markets faster than internal reviews can respond. Airlines operate within complex security frameworks. Safety protocols must be enforced consistently, but how those protocols are applied often determines public reaction. In this case, the removal of a high-profile passenger under ambiguous circumstances created optics that proved costly. What began as a routine security check evolved into a reputational crisis because perception outpaced explanation. And perception shapes markets. In aviation especially, trust defines loyalty. Travelers choose airlines based not only on price, but on reliability and service reputation. Investors commit capital based on long-term brand stability. When stability appears shaken, even temporarily, it influences forecasting models. This incident ultimately underscored a powerful truth about corporate America. The greatest risks aren't always mechanical failures or fuel price spikes. Sometimes, the greatest risks are human decisions made under pressure. Risk isn't only operational. It's reputational. It's procedural. It's cultural. And once public confidence wavers, restoring it requires more than press releases. It requires visible change, internal accountability, and renewed trust building. What started as a routine verification became a billion-dollar corporate challenge because it exposed how interconnected modern business truly is. Customer service affects perception. Perception affects investor confidence. Investor confidence affects capital flow. Capital flow determines growth. In today's economy, everything is linked, and sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest vulnerabilities. Because in the end, the most valuable asset any corporation holds isn't its aircraft fleet or infrastructure. It's credibility. In the United States, the biggest business moves rarely happen in front of cameras. They happen in private boardrooms, over quiet dinners, on discreet conference calls between investors and executives. While the public sees premieres and press tours, Another world operates behind the scenes, where influence, capital, and strategy quietly shape entire industries. Celebrities today are no longer just performers. Many are entrepreneurs, investors, and stakeholders in ventures far beyond entertainment. They build production companies, invest in tech startups, develop real estate portfolios, and participate in private equity groups that influence transportation, media, healthcare, and infrastructure. Denzel Washington is no exception. While he is widely respected as an Academy Award-winning actor and director, fewer people realize how deeply connected he is within high-level investment circles. Over the years, he has reportedly aligned himself with business leaders involved in media expansions, infrastructure development, and strategic aviation partnerships. He has long been known as someone who thinks beyond Hollywood, someone who understands legacy, sustainability, and long-term growth. According to sources close to the situation, he was connected to an investment group preparing to commit nearly $5 billion toward major airline industry initiatives. That number isn't symbolic. It represents serious expansion power, capital capable of reshaping routes, fleets, and long-term competitiveness in an industry that runs on razor-thin margins. That funding was reportedly tied to several transformative goals. Expanding domestic routes across underserved U.S. cities, bringing more direct travel options to regions often overlooked by major carriers. Fleet modernization projects aimed at increasing fuel efficiency and passenger comfort. Sustainability upgrades focused on reducing carbon emissions and improving environmental compliance. Strategic international partnerships designed to strengthen global reach and market positioning. In other words, this wasn't a marketing sponsorship or a celebrity endorsement deal. This was transformational capital. In aviation, expansion requires massive funding. Aircraft orders cost billions. Route development requires forecasting, infrastructure coordination, and regulatory approvals. Sustainability transitions demand long-term investment and confidence for financial backers. And investor confidence is everything. When trust is strong, funding flows. When trust weakens, everything pauses. After the incident on the plane, Denzel reportedly described the experience as deeply disappointing. Not humiliating, not explosive, just disappointing. But at that level of influence, disappointment carries weight. Within 48 hours, the investment group connected to him paused the funding agreement. Not canceled, paused. But in the world of high finance, even a pause sends shockwaves. Emergency board meetings were scheduled. Executives gathered in crisis rooms. Legal teams reviewed public exposure risks and contractual clauses. Investor relations departments prepared contingency statements. Financial analysts began speculating about ripple effects. Would the funding resume? Would other investors reconsider? Would competitors capitalize on the instability? Airline stocks wavered amid uncertainty. Business news outlets questioned whether the situation revealed deeper procedural flaws within the company's customer handling systems. Aviation experts debated whether the incident reflected a breakdown in communication between security and flight operations. The airline released a carefully crafted public statement calling the situation an unfortunate misunderstanding. But in corporate America, misunderstandings can be expensive. Because the true issue wasn't merely a technical verification error. Systems glitch. Software flags mistakes. Human error happens. The deeper concern was how the situation was handled. Could the issue have been resolved discreetly at the gate before boarding? Was removal from the aircraft the only option? Were proper de-escalation and customer dignity protocols followed? Was communication clear, respectful, and proportional to the concern? These questions matter, especially in industries where customer experience directly influences brand loyalty. When customer service intersects with public perception, the stakes multiply dramatically. In today's digital landscape, every incident can be recorded, shared, and analyzed within minutes. Companies are no longer judged solely by their policies, but by how those policies are executed in real time. And perception often moves faster than clarification. What began as a routine security check became a billion-dollar corporate crisis because it highlighted something investors cared deeply about: risk management. Risk is not just mechanical failure or fuel pricing. Risk is also reputational instability. Risk is customer distrust. Risk is viral backlash. Investors look for companies that demonstrate control under pressure. They look for leadership teams capable of resolving issues quietly, efficiently, and respectfully. When a situation escalates publicly, it introduces uncertainty, and markets dislike uncertainty. For corporate leaders nationwide, this incident became more than a headline. It became a lesson in operational discipline, a reminder that frontline employees represent the entire organization, that every interaction reflects corporate culture. Because in large organizations, reputation isn't shaped in the executive suite. It's shaped at the gate counter, at the boarding door, in the moments when pressure meets judgment. And now, what began as a single security decision had evolved into a defining moment for the company's leadership. The funding pause wasn't simply about personal offense. It was about confidence. Confidence in systems. Confidence in training. Confidence in judgment. When confidence shakes, capital hesitates. In an industry built on billion-dollar commitments, hesitation can change everything. What started as a routine verification turned into a reminder of how fragile trust can be and how costly it becomes when it's mishandled. Because in modern corporate America, the real currency isn't just money. It's credibility. By the next morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. What began as a quiet removal from a commercial flight had transformed into a nationwide headline. Morning talk shows replayed passenger footage on loop. News anchors leaned forward at their desks, asking the same question millions of Americans were asking. How does something like this happen? Radio hosts debated it during rush hour commutes. Callers phoned in with strong opinions. Some focused on airline procedures. Others focused on fairness. Business commentators shifted the conversation toward the potential financial fallout, analyzing what a paused multi-billion-dollar investment could mean for the aviation industry. And across social media, the reaction was immediate and intense. Hashtags calling for accountability began trending. Clips from the flight were shared thousands of times within hours. Influencers, public figures, and everyday Americans added their voices to the discussion. But what stood out most wasn't outrage. It was support. Support poured in from fans across the country for Denzel Washington, a man whose reputation had been built not just on box office success, but on consistency of character. Many Americans began sharing old interviews and speeches where he spoke about discipline, faith, responsibility, and staying grounded. Clips resurfaced of him thanking crew members at award shows. Stories circulated from people who had worked with him on film sets, describing how he treated everyone, from directors to assistants, with equal respect. That's what made the moment feel larger than a single airline incident. This wasn't just a random celebrity caught in a public misunderstanding. This was a man who had spent decades representing strength, integrity, and justice on screen. Whether portraying a determined coach, a civil rights leader, or a flawed hero seeking redemption. For many viewers, it felt symbolic. The same actor who had delivered powerful speeches about justice and dignity in films was now standing in the middle of a real-world conversation about fairness and respect. And yet, through all the noise, he remained silent. No dramatic press conference on courthouse steps. No emotional television appearance. No angry social media thread. In a media environment that often rewards outrage, that silence was noticeable. Instead, his representative issued a short, carefully worded statement. Every passenger deserves to be treated with fairness and respect. I hope this moment leads to reflection and improvement. That was it. No accusations. No threats. No ultimatums. Just principle. That single sentence echoed across news platforms nationwide. Headlines quoted it. Analysts dissected it. Commentators replayed it. And the more it was repeated, the clearer its message became. This wasn't about personal revenge. It wasn't about ego. It was about standards. In a culture where viral moments often escalate quickly into heated confrontations, Denzel modeled something different: restraint. And ironically, that restraint amplified the impact. Because when someone with power chooses calm over chaos, it sends a stronger signal than shouting ever could. Leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it's measured. Sometimes it's strategic. And sometimes it speaks through action rather than volume. By refusing to inflame the situation, he shifted the focus away from drama and toward accountability. The conversation moved beyond one individual and toward larger questions. How are procedures enforced? How are conflicts handled under pressure? How do companies balance security with dignity? His composure forced the spotlight onto systems rather than personalities. Business schools began referencing the situation in discussions about crisis management. Corporate communication experts analyzed the power of a restrained response. Public relations professionals pointed out how emotional reactions can escalate tension, but principled statements can reframe it. And for everyday Americans watching, there was something refreshing about it. In an era where viral clips often lead to instant online battles, here was a different example. A reminder that influence doesn't require volume, that strength doesn't require aggression. Real authority often reveals itself through control. By staying calm, Denzel Washington didn't just protect his own reputation. He elevated the conversation. He showed that you could demand accountability without losing dignity, that you can address injustice without becoming consumed by it. That measured action can carry more weight than explosive reaction. And perhaps that's why the moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't just about an airline. It wasn't just about funding. It was about character under pressure. When the cameras were rolling and the world was watching, he didn't perform. He led. And in doing so, he reminded millions that sometimes the strongest message isn't the loudest one. Sometimes it's the calmest. In the weeks that followed, the airline moved quickly to control the damage. Executives went on record announcing internal investigations, third-party reviews, and mandatory retraining sessions for frontline staff. They promised to reevaluate verification systems, strengthen de-escalation training, and implement new customer service protocols designed to prevent similar incidents from happening again. Press releases were issued. Apologies were carefully worded. Corporate leaders emphasized commitment to improvement. But behind the scenes, the financial impact was already unfolding. Market analysts began projecting losses, not only from the paused multi-billion-dollar funding agreement, but from something far more difficult to calculate: reputational harm. In corporate America, brand trust is currency. And once public confidence is shaken, rebuilding it requires time, transparency, and consistency. Industry experts pointed out that companies don't just lose money from withdrawn investments. They lose long-term leverage. They lose negotiation power. They lose consumer loyalty. And perhaps most damaging of all, they lose credibility. For boardrooms across the country, this incident became more than a viral headline. It became a case study in leadership seminars and executive strategy meetings. It demonstrated clearly how a single frontline decision can create executive-level consequences. Customer treatment can directly influence investor confidence. Public perception can shape billion-dollar outcomes in a matter of hours. In today's digital world, every interaction carries weight. A moment captured on a smartphone can travel across the nation before a company has time to respond. And when the individual involved is someone as respected as Denzel Washington, the spotlight becomes even brighter. But beyond business metrics and financial forecasts, this story carried something deeper, a human lesson. Respect is not a luxury. It's foundational. Whether someone is a movie star, a Fortune 500 executive, a small business owner, a veteran, a college student, or a first-time flyer, how you treat people matters. Not because of who they are, but because of who you are. This moment forced many Americans to reflect on a simple truth. You never truly know who someone is. You never know what influence they carry. You never know what partnerships, investments, or networks stand behind them. One assumption can cost millions. One misjudgment can cost billions. But more importantly, one respectful decision can prevent all of it. What made this story resonate wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a public meltdown. It was composure. In a moment where many might have reacted emotionally, Denzel Washington remained steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand special treatment. He didn't turn the situation into a spectacle. He raised standards instead. His response reminded corporate America that dignity should never depend on status. Leadership isn't proven when everything runs smoothly. It's revealed in moments of pressure. Character doesn't shine when cameras are rolling in your favor. It shows up when you're tested unexpectedly. For American audiences watching this unfold, the takeaway is powerful and clear. True power doesn't need a shout. Real leadership doesn't need to intimidate. And integrity doesn't require an audience. Sometimes the strongest message is delivered through calm action. If this story challenged your perspective, inspired you, or made you think differently about accountability and respect, take a moment to reflect on how small decisions shape bigger outcomes in business and in life. Because sometimes the biggest lessons don't happen on movie screens. They happen at 30,000 feet.